Now, new numbers out this morning from the Tuesday primary, and in the closely watched Congressional District 3 race, Republican Senator John Braun, who currently represents Centralia but is giving up that seat for a run for Congress, now leads the incumbent Democrat Marie Gluesenkamp Perez by about 3,200 votes. So this really flipped in the last 24 hours. Many more ballots to count, but those two will be advancing to the November election. Now, this is the race the RNC is targeted, hoping to flip the district back to the Republicans, where the balance of Congress kind of hangs by a thread at this point to their favor. So as of shortly after 11 o'clock this morning, here's what the Secretary of State had on that race. And you can see in these numbers, as I mentioned, about that 3,200 vote edge for Senator Braun over the incumbent. But the number here you see from Democrat Brent Henrick, who ran to the left of Marie Gluesenkamp Perez, who has tried to position herself as a moderate in that purple district. The further left part of that party has been very critical of her for not being more progressive. And with Henrick having a good chunk of those votes at 28,000 so far, where will those voters go come November? Senator Braun told me earlier this week he actually expects that some of those people are so angry with her, even though they are to the left of her, that they may turn their support back to him. Only time will tell on that one. Now, political watchers also very interested in the Supreme Court races. GOP Chair Jim Walsh posted on X yesterday that all four of the Republican candidates the state party recommended are advancing to face Democrats. We've got Scott Edwards, David Stevens, Dave Larson, and Todd Bloom. And in Larson's race, as I mentioned, he will face Justice Theo Angelis, recently appointed by Governor Ferguson. And my colleague Tim Klauser interviewed both Larson and Angelis leading up to the primary. Here's part of his conversation with Dave Larson.
Justice Angelis, he recently joined the bench. He worked at K&L Gates for 26 years. Governor Ferguson said himself that he worked with Angelis at K&L Gates and had teamed up on a case or two in the past. Senator Jamie Peterson, he also practiced at the firm, sponsored the new income tax, endorsed Angelis, and Angelis had previously donated to Peterson's campaigns. I mean, as voters look at a race that could affect future tax cases, should they view those as a recusal issue, in appearance of fairness concern, or just simple political context in the race?
It's a direct assault on judicial independence to appoint campaign contributors, because he's also appointed to contributed to Governor Ferguson. It's a direct assault on judicial independence to have somebody that's been contributing to your gubernatorial or your campaigns, Attorney General, Governor, since 2009. He's Theo Theo Angelis is a decent guy. Not trying to attack him, but he's already given to Governor Ferguson for the 2028 election, right? And so you're gonna have a justice sitting on the bench hearing the income tax case where he's donated to Moncadingra, Jamie Peterson, Governor Ferguson, and even Nick Brown. And that justice is sitting on the bench. Somebody that's cares very dearly about judicial independence, and it's troubling. And the reason judicial independence is so important is that's how we become the third branch of government. The judiciary is supposed to be a backstop, not an open gate, right? And so if the governor or the legislature steps out of line, or the attorney general or anybody else, your job is to make sure they don't step out of line. If they're in bounds, if everything else, well, then it's a strike, right? And they're good to go. But if there's something that's wrong, the Supreme Court has to be not only in reality be that backstop, but appear to be that backstop too. So those kind of influences are troublesome.
And now that same topic was asked by Tim of sitting Justice Theo Angelis.
You, Governor Ferguson and Senator Peterson, at one point or another, you guys had all worked at K&L Gates and briefly together at the same time. Again, Peterson had drafted the income tax and Ferguson had signed it. I was wondering if you could kind of explain to voters who see that connection and kind of maybe put off about that, and explain the nature of your work with them at K&L Gates and what they should make of those relationships now.
I think I worked on one case involving a question of the First Amendment with Governor Ferguson when he was at the firm. There was a question about whether people could refer to their opponents in the voters pamphlet. And that ended up going into the federal court system and even up to the Ninth Circuit. And we had represented the Seattle Ethics and Election Commission on that issue. But it wasn't a partisan issue at all. It was really just good government and free speech rights and how they operate. And with respect to Senator Peterson, he actually was a mentor to me. We clerked for the same judge, the same Republican appointed judge in Washington, D.C., 5 years apart. He was a mentor to me early on in my career and helped me understand just acclimating to a law firm. But we never did any work together, or not very much work together, because he was a corporate lawyer. He was working on deals and those sorts of things, and I was a litigator. So we really didn't spend time working on particular cases together. Conversely, when I was clerking at the U.S. Attorney's Office during law school, I worked with Diane Tibelius, right, who was I think a chair of the GOP party. And there are a lot of lawyers who have a lot of different political viewpoints that you work with on cases. And when you're a lawyer working for a client, it's the client's interests that always come first. And so politics never really came into our work. It was all about who the client was and how we could advocate for that client in the best way possible.
Now, overall voter turnout as of this morning was looking at just shy of 25%. Now, with a primary at the peak of summer and people are out of their routines, it's not a huge surprise that the numbers aren't that much better. But both parties, of course, are hoping that come November we'll have a much better turnout. And that generally tends to be the case.